Someone paid more.
What happened?
And here we go. It's insane to think that Saints Row 3 came out in 2011. This was a game that, after a few missteps, Volition just said, screw it, let's just make a game that's fun all the way through and see what happens. And regardless of what you or I may think of the end result, it went on to sell more than 5.5 million copies. So either one dude bought a ton of copies or it was insanely well received. Regardless of all that, seeing a remaster wasn't exactly surprising, but it wasn't expected either. What form is it going to take? The Ezio collection form, where nothing more than a resolution change really comes about and everything is shoved into one package? Or is it going to be like Red Faction Remastered, which is not only one of the worst names ever, it's also just not a good remaster? Or was it going to be something in between, or possibly something above? Well, for $39.99 on PS4, Xbox, and PC, you can find out. I've got it. I've played it. I want to talk about my impressions for it. Let's just jump straight on in there. If you like the video, I'd love for you to subscribe. When I turned this on, one of the first things I noticed was the graphical improvements are noticeable. There is a large number of changes here. There's changes to the amount of spawns in different areas with cars and people. Graphically, all of the characters have had huge changes, which unfortunately leads to some creepy ass plastic surgery face, which I'll talk about in the voice section. But you do get some huge increases. The population itself changes, and it makes the city feel busier, which I believe was one of the major problems that we actually had with the original Saints Row 3. And that's not the only difference here. There's a lot of differences between this version of Saints Row and the others, which to somebody like myself, hey, I'd like to see all remasters do this, but they don't, so it's impressive to see it here. First of all, global illumination, huge change to the way the lighting is done, the way the textures look. All of those are vastly improved in this version, as well as anti-aliasing that gives you a really good picture overall as you're playing. Also, on the consoles, you have the ability to unlock the frame rate. This helps the Xbox X, I would say, in particular. I noticed that was much smoother, really close to 60 with manual as well as software counting of the frames. PS4 Pro saw some increase there, but it wasn't as high. You guys know me, I'm not a huge fan of variable frame rates, that's for sure. But when it comes to the X, at least, it is close enough for the longer period of time. I could see most people wanting to play the system in that way, even though I did notice some issues here and there. That's just really going to be up to you. And sure, I don't think anybody's going to look at this and be like, hey man, it's a brand new game for the Xbox X. That's not the way it's going to be. But it still does look very good compared to its predecessor. And when you look at it compared to almost any other remaster out there, the amount of work that's sort of unexpected here is very high and very noticeable. Everything from reflections to that lighting that I talked about. But that does bring up some issues. The first one I want to talk about is voice. So this is voiced by incredible voice actors. You have Troy Baker in there, you got Laura Bailey, and you have all these different voice actors. By the way, if you are playing this game, you absolutely should pick the zombie voice for the main player instead of one of the voice actors. It is awesome having him driving along in his car, singing songs in a zombie voice. However, it leads to some issues, and one of those is that the lip syncing just looks horrendous. Now, this is because a lot of those models have actually changed. When you look at characters like Johnny Gat, that guy doesn't look anything near like he looked in the original game. They've sort of molded them and adjusted them for how they should look now. What this has done is, it looks like that old lip sync data did not get adjusted for the new facial structure, and you get some odd moments, like when a character's talking, and it looks like they're just jibber-jabbering. It looks like two forearms flapping in the wind for their lips. It's very weird. When it comes to the voices, I like all the voices. I've always liked the over-the-top, more humorous bits of Saints Row. It does have some issues there with the graphics. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is music. This game, it's got license tracks out the ass, and leaping through a window, smashing the driver out, and sitting back while your posse leaps in. Suddenly, the Rocky IV soundtrack starts blaring, and you're just sitting there driving around. That is so great. Or as I said before, when the zombie is singing along to songs, and he's just like, roar, 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 and the other guy beside you is singing at the same time and doesn't seem to notice that you're a zombie. That shit is awesome. It is so good, and I think this is one of the better licensed soundtracks. It's just sort of eclectic. It doesn't have a number of, I would say, commercial hits at that time, but it has enough of them that it lodges itself perfectly in that time frame. But speaking of time frames, let's talk about something that didn't age very well, and that's a lot of the sound on a lot of these guns. It's just really not that good when it comes to the soundscapes. Tonally, a lot of these guns just don't have the punch that you would want. Especially things like the sniper rifle, which just sounds like somebody snapping their fingers like that. It just doesn't work that well. However, I don't think anybody was expecting them to go and get completely different sound samples. In fact, we've seen this a lot of times where games will go and they will get the old sound samples and they'll sort of try to up-res them or clean them up a little bit. And sometimes that can actually sound pretty terrible. I said up-res, I meant up-sample. You guys know what I meant. We've seen some issues when it comes to sound, in particular with Mafia 2 that was just recently remastered. Here, we don't have any issues of that kind. We just have what I would consider a fairly bland soundscape when it comes to the guns. Saints Row never really nailed it, and they didn't really go for realism, and you notice that. Now, let's just jump into this and talk about the game itself. You know crap's hitting the fan when the game starts out with the Saints robbing a bank as themselves. That's sort of like asking Jared Leto to play the Joker. Do you just sort of follow him around in his normal life and record it and be like, hey man, pick up some milk? Okay, that's the movie. That's sort of what happens here. The Saints Row become the joke themselves. They've lost their way completely. What follows is some hijinks, a bad guy's introduction, and probably one of the most over-the-top entries to a game that you ever seen. And boom, the Saints are not in Kansas anymore. Someone clicked their purple-dyed crocodile slippers, and you are now in the town of Steelport, or the city, where the Saints have to fight their way through all the same crap and preamble that they've done in the past games. This is one of those ways in which you can just sort of reset everything and have them start over anew. Instead of branching out like the other titles did, where you had sort of different groups and different storylines, here the storylines sort of interconnect over the top of one another, and they don't really introduce themselves as acts. Though, in a way, it's sort of the same kind of thing. You also have all of those side activities that you've always expected, including driving around in a tank and things like that. What you end up getting is a game that really is lodged in that time frame. The gameplay-wise, I like it. Clothesline and Pimps has always been amazing fun in real life, but here in Saints Row, somehow they figured out to make it even more enjoyable. There's a ton of over-the-top combat moves, there's DDTs and body slams and clotheslines and crotch shots. You can do all this crazy stuff. The game really never does let up. It's just consistently, you go out there and do whatever you want. And the remake allows for the same thing, except it looks better. It actually controls a little bit better because the frame rate is better, and overall it's just a more enjoyable title to play. It also contains all the DLC from the original game now injected here for that same price, so you're running around with all of that DLC content. You know, Saints Row 3, I think, was sort of the split. A lot of people saw that GTA 4 came out. It was more dour. It was more sour. What you had was Saints Row coming out and just being like, let's just do this, purple dildos and all. Some people bid into that. Some people did not. I think a lot of people like 3 more than 4, and that is what you're getting as a remaster of what I consider to probably be the one that is the most beloved by everybody. Other than 2, I think a lot of people really liked 2. But with 3, what you get is a slicker movement series. Everything feels really good. That combat feels good. The shooting feels as good as these kind of games are going to feel. Obviously, it's not going to be incredibly improved. When it comes to the city itself, it's pretty easy to know where you are. This is one of the cities where I personally feel like it's very easy to actually know where you are no matter what, even if you're not looking at the map, which to a lot of games, that's not exactly true unless you spent a lot of time playing it. And speaking of a lot of time playing it, I think that's one issue I had with Saints Row 3. I had it with GAT for sure, and I did have it with 4 as well. There is a repetitiveness that begins, and I've already felt it a little bit here in the remake. Again, this is for a different price, but you start doing a lot of these same sort of movements, these same sort of activities, and it can, yes, it can definitely feel repetitive, and I certainly do feel that when it comes to the remake. None of that has changed. This still feels like a game solidly made in 2011, don't get me wrong. As you're playing it, you're not going to magically think, man, this is a game that was made yesterday. It does have a lot of that cumbersome structure in the way that these side activities are done. And it's like, hey, go and assassinate this guy, and you just sort of follow him around. You end up identifying who he is. You also have those open world hijinks that I think are much worse in older games and have gotten better and better as we move forward. Admittedly, Red Dead 2 had a lot of crap when you'd smash a horse into somebody. You wouldn't even have to smash a horse into somebody. You could walk by him and the horse's tail would whisk past his head, and suddenly the deputy's like, we gotta string him up. And that absolutely happens in Saints Row 3 Remaster. You will be running around just talking to somebody or coming out of a store, and suddenly there's just explosions going off and cars driving over people. And a lot of times you can just be sitting there going like, what the hell did I do? A lot of times you don't even know if it was for sure you or not, because the game does have a tendency to throw those gang fights and have them fighting one another around you to make you feel like the world's more alive, but it really doesn't necessarily pull it off. Saints Row 3, I would say, if you liked it originally, this is probably just going to be better. You're not really going to have an issue with it. If you are currently somebody who never got to play it, but you're an older gamer and you maybe play those kind of games, you know what they expect, hey, this remaster's got some stuff to offer. And when it comes to fun factor, we'll talk about this a little bit. Couple hours into it, I would say I'm still enjoying it. The grind of that repetitiveness can sort of get to you, definitely, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be something that will magically stop me from playing it. You just have to sort of understand that this is a little bit of an older game and it can feel that way. The game's got co-op, so somebody can jump in at any time, and that to me is fantastic. By the way, it does work. Check that out. Jumping in and jumping out just seems to be pretty seamless right now. Go to town, that's sort of what this is about. I think that's what's cool. We're getting a lot of these kind of games, just like laid back. You've got Zen games like your Spin Tires, those kind of titles, and then you have something like this where I just don't think a lot of people necessarily expected much from it, and it's always nice to at least get a little bit more than we expect. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Expect to see more videos this week, a bunch of them. If you get a chance, check out Facebook and Twitter, all that kind of stuff. You can follow me there. And of course, you can become a patron on the Patreon website. If I've saved you any money or possibly warned you about a crappy game, maybe jump in there, join the group, a fantastic group of people in there. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.